After playing through the entirety of Alan Wake 2, I was left overwhelmed with the amount of narrative work put into it, and how they mix different types of media to convey their story. And, like most people, I started reading countless narrative analyses on the game. I went so far as to decide to study about concepts involving narrative and how they can be applied to games. With my research finished, I'm now going to share with you my narrative analysis of Alan Wake 2 and Portal 2. It goes without saying, but this video will have spoilers for Alan Wake 2 and Portal 2. All reference and gameplay clips I am going to use will be linked down below. In my analysis, I am going to paraphrase a lot of what was said in these videos, so I can go into further detail. All links will also be in the description. But first, let's establish the concepts we will be using to later analyze these games. Before answering what makes a good narrative, we first need to define the difference between narrative and plot. Let's use for example the last scene of Alan Wake 2 normal ending. In this scene, Saga Anderson picks up her phone and calls Logan, her daughter. A narrative is exactly that, a sequence of events organized in a comprehensible way. Plot suggests that events are somehow related by cause and effect. Let's use the same example from earlier. Saga Anderson picks up her phone and calls Logan, her daughter, because she wants to know if she is alive. When thinking about a plot, one must consider scenes and events. Now that we know the theory, then let's talk about what makes a good narrative. According to the author of Narrative Explanation, a good narrative stems from its excellence in organizing events in a way that forms a comprehensible whole. Let's use a similar example from the one we used before. If I say, Alan Wake woke up, that's not quite right. So, if we say, Alan woke up, later got dressed, even later went to his typewriter, many would agree that this does not form a complete narrative. So why is it not a narrative? Because the connection between the mentioned events is not sufficiently strong. Now that we have discussed what makes a good narrative, let's talk about what makes a good plot. A good plot consists of the things characters do, feel, think, or say that make a difference in significant events of a story. It also needs to convince the reader that what is happening is important and significant not only for the story but for the characters. Of course, a good story does not only have a good narrative and a good plot. Other aspects such as theme, characters, and context, among others, also play a crucial role in composing a good work. However, in this video we will not focus on them as much. Now, let's explore some examples of games that make the most of different ways to present their narrative, and using the concepts learned earlier, we will understand why their stories are so memorable. Valve games need little to no introduction regarding how they innovated in the narrative aspect of their games. With its first game in 1998, Half-Life revolutionized the first-person game genre by introducing an interactive story where the player's actions actively impacted the world around them and the narrative at large. However, in this video, we will not discuss this game series because, for example, another game franchise, Portal, will help us show an excellent example of a linear narrative. Portal 2, the second release in the series, provides an example that, even without the innovation that came from other Valve games, shows a classic way of telling its narrative, quite similar to other types of media, without sacrificing a good plot. Cave Johnson is the founder of Aperture Science and is portrayed as a young, visionary, charismatic, and eccentric scientist and entrepreneur.
Welcome, gentlemen, to Aperture Science. Astronauts, war heroes, Olympians, you're here because we want the best. And you are it. So, who is ready to make some science?
I
am. Now, you already met one another on the limo ride over, so let me introduce myself. I'm Cave Johnson. I own the place. That eager voice you heard is the lovely Carolyn, my assistant. Rest assured, she has transferred your honorarium to the charitable organization of your choice. Isn't that right, Carolyn?
Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson.
She's the backbone of this facility. Pretty as a postcard, too. Sorry, fellas. She's married. To science.
All of his inventions end up being useless for science, and his most notable creation was a toilet, which is something that frustrates him a lot. He works alongside his assistant Carolyn, who supports him in all of his ideas. After his latest creation, a weapon that creates portals between places, he reveals that the materials used on the walls of Aperture are impregnated with ground moon rocks. Although it is possible to create portals on these surfaces, which is great for science, prolonged exposure to them can be lethal. Considering that Cave Johnson has been working on this technology for over 30 years, he becomes ill to the point of almost dying. Yet he remains charismatic and sarcastic in his announcement to the company.
Welcome to the Enrichment Center. Since making test participation mandatory for all employees, the quality of our test subjects has risen dramatically. Employee retention, however, has not. As a result, you may have heard we're going to phase out human testing. There's still a few things left to wrap up, though. First up, conversion gel. The bean counters told me we literally could not afford to buy $7 worth of moon rocks, much less 70 million. Bought them anyway, ground them up, mixed them into a gel. And guess what? Ground up moon rocks are pure poison. I am deathly ill. Still, it turns out they're a great portal conductor. So now, we're going to see if jumping in and out of these new portals can somehow leach the lunar poison out of a man's bloodstream. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Let's all stay positive and do some science. That said, I would really appreciate it if you could test as fast as possible. Carolyn, please have been thinking. When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back. Get mad! I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these?
Take the lemons.
Demand to see life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemons.
Oh, I like this guy.
I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
Burn his house down. Finding people. He says what we're all thinking.
This dialogue is comical in terms of context, but it is sad when you realize that this once optimistic scientist and successful entrepreneur has now turned against his own upbeat view of life and completely deconstructed the cheerful saying about making lemonade when life gives you lemons. This speech is subverted and given some context in his next speech.
Point is, if we can store music on a compact disc, why can't we store a man's intelligence and personality on one? So I have the engineers figuring that out now. Brain mapping, artificial intelligence. We should have been working on it 30 years ago. I will say this, and I'm going to say it on tape so everybody hears it 100 times a day. If I die before you people can pour me into a computer, I want Carolyn to run this place. Now she'll argue. She'll say she can't. She's modest like that, but you make her. Hell, put her in my computer. I don't care. All right, test's over. You can head on back to your desk.
Cave Johnson, this character we have grown attached to for his charisma, now distances himself from us with his words. He has gone mad to the point of initiating the development of artificial intelligence to keep his consciousness alive for decades, and if it wasn't possible to put him in, he would force his assistant against her will to submit to the machine, to continue the legacy of his company. The narrative of Cave Johnson's story follows a coherent, gradual structure suitable for his circumstances and his trope, a scientist who puts his work and pride before his own life. The narrative is well built due to the coherent connection between his actions. His plot is engaging due to his funny yet tragic speeches that impact not only himself but those around him. In this example, and throughout the rest of Portal 2, we have an entirely linear narrative. A linear narrative is direct and continuous, where the story unfolds in a defined path, like chapters of a book. The player is nothing more than a spectator of the unfolding story. Although certain actions are influenced by the player, the course of the story is the same for everyone. Now, let's talk about Alan Wake 2 is the sequel to a small game released in 2010 by Remedy, highly acclaimed by its fans but gaining little to no traction at the time. The company has a strong focus on narrative games since its first success, Max Payne, which drew inspiration from action movies. Since then, Remedy has been known for blending various forms of media in its projects, and Alan Wake 2 takes this idea to a whole new level. Alan Wake begins his story in the first game as a best-selling author of investigative fiction suffering from creative block for over 2 years. During his visit to the small town of Bright Falls in Washington, supernatural events unfold involving him and his wife, Alice. By the end of the game, Alice is missing and Alan Wake is trapped in the dark place. In this dimension, everything Alan writes becomes reality in the real world, and the entity controlling this place forces Alan to write a story where it escapes and takes over Bright Falls. The beginning of Alan Wake 2 shows the character still trapped within this dimension, now with the goal of writing himself out of the reality in which he is confined. Alan writes a book where, through various different media forms, he attempts to escape. Here, we see the first strength of the game, how it incorporates transmedia into its narrative. You might be wondering where is transmedia used in this game, so let me show you some examples.
You know, I've waited so long to get my hands on the sequel to Departure. You left us on quite the cliffhanger. We've all been dying to know what "it's not a lake, it's an ocean" really means.
The victim was one of their own. FBI Special Agent Robert Nightingale, gone missing here 13 years ago. Now he had suddenly turned up, only to be...
A transmedia narrative is when a story or elements of the story are told through different artistic mediums or forms of media within the same work. All of this work wasn't added only to complement the game, but also to establish parallels and different representations of the player's circumstance within the narrative. The use of transmedia enriches the plot experienced by the characters. The game constantly changes its media to match its story. On the surface, there is the game telling the story through conventional scenes. Within it are the pages that the player collects from the book Alan is writing, deepening the story and providing more context for certain character perspectives. Within this book, there is music contextualized with the story, and live TV programs that further deepen the story. And of course, I wouldn't forget the best way they use transmedia to tell Alan's story. During the game, the player participates in an interactive live musical, where panels show characters dancing and playing a song that summarizes Alan Wake's entire life. After all this, the characters dance together. Now let's analyze the story. The narrative can be experienced through the perspective of two protagonists that the player can switch between at any time to follow the events of the story. Each provides a different view, without accidentally revealing something ahead of time. Despite all this complexity in the work, the narrative is well structured and coherent, and the plot is intriguing with unexpected and impactful moments for its characters. Although its ending leaves a lot to be desired in my opinion, it's still a mind-boggling and exciting adventure from beginning to end. In summary, Alan Wake 2 is an example of a branching narrative, where the player can perform certain actions in the order they choose. They must also engage with different media, separate and parallel to the main story, which do not directly progress it. Therefore, the player always needs to return to the main game narrative to continue the story. There is an argument that Alan Wake 2 may not be a branching narrative due to the lack of different endings for the player to choose from, and this argument may indeed be correct. I classify this game as such, but this definition is open to interpretation. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. It took longer to make than expected, and I thought about scrapping it altogether many times, but in the end I am proud of the result. See you on the next one. Take care of yourselves.